day. Every one of them. Somebody talked. Who was it? Was it you? At every stage, you've known too much. I'm going to ask you again. Did you talk?
Nobody talked. We're running a temporal pincer movement.
What?
Pincer movement. Not in space, in time. Half his team moves forward through the event, he monitors them and then attacks at the end moving backwards. Knowing everything.
Christopher Nolan has always been one of the most fascinating filmmakers to me. One of the biggest directors working today, if not in name, then by pure scale alone. Few people have consistently made movies that feel this big, and even fewer get the opportunity to anymore. Yet, after finishing The Odyssey, I had this overwhelming feeling that Nolan had been operating at a much larger scale than we had even been anticipating. The Odyssey, Nolan's biggest and grandest project yet, felt so massive in part because of the incredible filmmaking at work, but also how Nolan had paid off ideas and story threads he had started exploring 6 years earlier in Tenet, and then again 3 years later in Oppenheimer. So I want to talk about this secret trilogy of Nolan's, but part of what makes this such an interesting run of films is that we are starting with The Odyssey.
You're a man who needs to control his fate, but you cannot control this.
The Odyssey, Christopher Nolan's most recent film, tells the tale of Odysseus and the Odyssey, the most popular story of all time. Obviously, Christopher Nolan isn't just telling the tale of Odysseus because he feels like it or wants to see the story portrayed, but Nolan found something really animating and exciting in this story, an idea that strikes at something in the core of all of us. With this being the first of Nolan's trilogy, but the latest release, it feels much like Nolan is pulling a bit of a pincer maneuver of his own, revealing the story in reverse order, now finally showing us how, over time, we've arrived where we are today. Early in The Odyssey, Nolan teases at an idea that at first just seems to be a bit interesting, but is actually one of the main ideas he's pursuing in this film, that being Zeus's Law. Zeus's Law is an ancient Greek code of hospitality that you should protect, feed, and welcome any traveler or stranger you encounter, as gods may walk amongst mortals in disguise. This general code of hospitality can be found in most ancient religious texts and teachings too, the idea of caring for your neighbor as yourself, and The Odyssey presents this idea front and center, and argues that our destruction of each other and the world started when we stopped respecting and caring for one another. Zeus's Law is violated in many different ways throughout the film. We watch Antinous and the rest of the suitors take advantage of the required hospitality of Odysseus' household, while denying it to those they don't deem worthy. Even besides that, they are cruel and use the kindness of strangers to deceive them and hurt them. Look at what happens to Iamus or their plans for Telemachus. But the striking revelation isn't to see that the suitors have fallen, but that Odysseus has. On top of Zeus's Law, the people from the sea are mentioned, an unknown group of warriors who are threatening to usher in a new dark age. Odysseus reveals later in the film, and we watch through his perspective, that they broke Zeus's law. The Trojan horse was the ultimate lie. Odysseus is racked with this guilt, and we see that only he has any understanding of what they just did. While his men celebrate, Odysseus is immediately struck with the revelation of exactly what he's done. The horse, the legendary story, the tale of hero's victory, was the greatest violation of Zeus's law, the action that broke the foundation of society as a whole. A huge theme Nolan is exploring is how societies crumble, how we fall apart. Societal collapse is mentioned directly multiple times in the film, and is a real anxiety that becomes a motivating factor for nearly every character. The Age of Bronze is coming to an end. If the large ironclad soldiers didn't make it clear, Odysseus and his men are holding on to an age that is about to pass, which is a common fear, one that, if even on a smaller scale, has been a common sentiment throughout history. Many worried about modernity finding its way into the Odyssey, whether it be the costumes, the dialogue, or more likely, the story and themes of the film. Many were scared of how tacked on a contemporary message could feel. I think Nolan found a way to make it feel modern without feeling forced or out of place. The story feels reflective of where we are today, but also entirely invested in the text of the story itself. Odysseus directly reflects on the Trojan horse and its culpability in the ruination of society, which is such an interesting idea, and I love how Nolan makes that the key motivating factor here. Guilt is a theme that Nolan is continually intrigued by, and one that clearly weighs heavily on his soul. Odysseus' guilt is one of the most striking traits of the character. Throughout the film, we watch his guilt rise more and more to the surface. Nolan emphasizes how after the war, without his family and afraid to return home, it's all he really had left. When we see Odysseus with Calypso, his questions almost immediately lead back to his family, the war, and his men. While this definitely is an editing and story choice that helps the pacing out in a major way, it also highlights that at the core of Odysseus' journey is guilt. Calypso notes that the heart was always going to return, and the mind would soon follow. And when we see Odysseus begin to remember or want to, it's centered around a shame deep inside him. But even after Odysseus is able to work past the guilt of his men's death, there's still what he did to the fragile bonds that hold us together. It may not be a new idea to explore or to apply to the story, but I love how Nolan makes it clear that the Odyssey that Odysseus goes on is much more internal than literal. It's not that he couldn't return home, it's maybe that part of him didn't want to. because part of him can't get over how ashamed he is about what he did on that day. In many ways, the Odyssey is a story about hubris, about how men are consumed and blinded by their pride. Look no further than Odysseus, a man who continues to defy the gods and place himself above the traditions in ways that he is allegedly fighting to protect. Many of Nolan's protagonists are hyper-competent men who can accomplish a remarkable task that it seems only they alone can accomplish, but also ones who rarely consider if they even should. Odysseus' pride defines him. From the first moments we actually get to spend with him, he defies whatever they say the gods may do, and chooses a path separate from Agamemnon. He's continually confronted by his inability to change fate, and yet he defies that decree, choosing to try and save his men's lives himself, without telling them. Odysseus' pride is not as boisterous as it is in the novel, as I think Nolan is critiquing a far less vocal and loud form of pride, that same one in many of his protagonists. The assumption that their competence and skill puts their life and wants above those of the people around them. Odysseus doesn't brag to the Cyclops and receive punishment that way. Instead, he shoots him in the eye socket after he spits up a helmet. In the cave, Odysseus chooses not to bury and honor his men like tradition, and the gods declare they do, something he continually forgoes throughout the film. And so, confronted with the shame of what he's done, he reacts selfishly and pridefully. There are many striking moments and quotes in this film, many that felt like Nolan was paying off ideas that he had been pursuing for years. But towards the end of the film, Nolan has a quote and image combo that truly feels like a perfect thesis statement for what this entire trilogy will be about. As Odysseus boards his ship with Penelope and sets off to the far west to honor his men, he talks about how tales of their journey in battle will only be told in song, because it will be all they have to remember them by. Penelope then remarks to him, "Civilization will rise again," to which Odysseus then replies, "The dawn will break on a darkening world, and once again, our mistakes will be forgotten." As we then cut to the image Nolan has been building to all film, the sight that took away Odysseus' breath during the siege of Troy, the horse crashing into the temple pillars. This shot genuinely took my breath away the first time I saw the film, a moment he spent 3 hours building to, and that felt as epic and destructive as it was intended to. It's incredible, but it's the most literal and direct representation of what Nolan is saying here. They broke the pillars of society that held us together. Odysseus defied the gods, and so many have suffered and will suffer because of it. It's the mayhem, destruction, deceit, and pain caused by that one action all on display. But in an unfortunately very apt and timely sense, Nolan calls out through Odysseus' line, "These mistakes will continue. The more we ignore our past, what we've done, the more this foundation crumbles." Nolan went back to the beginning because he's showing us that we've made these same mistakes, that we've continued to defy the gods and disregard one another, and will continue to reckon with the consequences of those actions.
They won't fear it until they understand it, and they won't understand it until they've used it.
Oppenheimer, the second film in this run either way you cut it, tells the story of the real man Robert Oppenheimer. It focuses primarily on Oppenheimer's time working on the Manhattan Project, the lead up to developing the bomb, and then the aftermath after the bombs are used. Once again, Christopher Nolan isn't just interested in the story of J. Robert Oppenheimer. Although that alone is an interesting story, Nolan is instead interested in the man Oppenheimer, why he did what he did, and what Oppenheimer represents about us. Interestingly, there's another dual perspective like the Odyssey, and this time, directly framing men's culpability. As the color sections of the film move forward through what is likely Oppenheimer's subjective memory of the creation of the bomb and the process that led up to that, the film is divided into another half, a black and white section that is set after the bombs have been deployed. This section reads as much more objective and direct, a literal account of what happened. But as we come to learn, even if this perspective is more grounded, it's not subjective. We're seeing Lewis Strauss's perspective, which once again may be more accurate, yet is still another point of view. Much like the Odyssey, Nolan is showing how one man's mistakes have plagued society, but he's also making it clear that this responsibility is shared. This distrust, this deceit, and the consequences of it all is on all of us. We've all, in our own little ways, contributed to the feeling that society is maybe ending, or that we broke it in a way that seems impossible to fix. Guilt is once again present, and in a major way. Oppenheimer is not just guilty, he's burdened by the weight of his guilt. The cost of his actions have destroyed him. Before he even creates the atomic bomb, there is a cosmic or existential guilt that weighs on Oppenheimer. Maybe a calling for more, a desire to solve the universe, or his own personal ambitions manifesting the only way they knew how. Oppenheimer is a fractured man even in his youth. Much like Memento, this feels like a story about a man who's already dead, a ghost who's reckoning with his past. Oppenheimer is incredibly frail, and Killian is straining his muscles as much as he can, to the point that Oppenheimer looks like a decaying corpse even as a living man. His guilt haunts him, much like many of the Walking Dead protagonists in Nolan's films. A large talking point at the time, and one I annoyingly still see to the day, is that by not showing us the bombings, Nolan's allowed both us and Oppenheimer to avoid the full weight of the tragedy. But I'd argue that was Nolan's entire point. Oppenheimer never saw the bombs fall. He literally never came face to face with that destruction. He avoided pictures of the aftermath. Yet the guilt of it still consumes him. Look no further than the opening, when he attempts to murder his professor. This is a real thing that happened, and something that Oppenheimer never could explain exactly why he did, but it's the representation of the incurable desire, the temptation of knowledge and power, much like the bomb. Oppenheimer doesn't initially think if he should poison the apple, just that he can and that he wants to. Unlike the bomb though, Oppenheimer gets to take that mistake back. This disaster is prevented, but he clearly doesn't learn from this. That same fear and desire to undo your actions is present again when Oppenheimer has completed the bombs, yet now it's too late. What's done here cannot be undone. Hubris is once again present and in many ways the cause of our hero's downfall. Of course, there is an age-old sentiment in saying that they were too focused on if they could build the bomb that they never took the time to fully consider whether they should build the bomb. This isn't just a detail that slips past their mind though. Oppenheimer is dismissive of concerns or alternate plans. He believes he's found their course and they must see it through. In this way, it's clear why Nolan loves directly tying him to the myth of Prometheus. Prometheus, the man who stole fire from the gods and gave it to man, Nolan is acknowledging how we also defied the gods. Our punishment, the ruin of the world we live in, is because we disobeyed the natural way of things. I'm not entirely sure if Nolan is religious, but it's clear he's striking at something in the heart of all of these stories. What kept humans tied together, and how these men have and will continue to defy the world, and we will suffer the consequences because of it. Yet, as Oppenheimer and many of them say to themselves as justification, someone else would have done it. Oppenheimer assumes that he, as the man who brought fire to all of humanity, can then control and understand it. Yet we watch it immediately stripped from his hands. Right after the victory of creating the atomic bomb, we witness the bombs loaded up and taken off. Oppenheimer's say and role is gone. He's directly calling out our desire to control fate, or that we can't open Pandora's box and then contain whatever is inside. Much like Odysseus and Nolan himself, this feels like a direct reflection of the cost of following your desires. How you have to associate and partner with people you may not like or agree with, people you even might find reprehensible, and at the end of the day, they're going to have say over how your work is used. I want to continue to harp one specific aspect of guilt that the movie really nails, and that is Oppenheimer's lack of awareness or purposeful ignorance. I mentioned the fact that he refused to look at the aftermath of the bombings, and that the film directly reckons with that. But it also directly reckons with that in the process of making the bombs. How Oppenheimer rejects advice, how he rejects logic, and how he pursues the passion regardless of the consequence. All of this comes to a head in the auditorium scene, which is breathtaking. Oppenheimer can't run from the inner fear he's had this entire film, that blood is on his hands, and that he's responsible for where we go from here. Similarly to the Odyssey, there's one huge moment in particular that Nolan keeps building to throughout the entire film. This time, it's a conversation. It's hinted pretty early on that something serious is said between Oppenheimer and Einstein when they talk near the lake, and we spend the entire film wondering what it could have been. Did Oppenheimer take a jab at Strauss like Strauss assumed? Did he disrespect Einstein? Once again, we don't learn until the very end, when Oppenheimer says the very haunting line, "When I came to you with those calculations, we thought we might start a chain reaction that would destroy the entire world. I believe we did." So great. Just because we didn't set the entire atmosphere ablaze doesn't mean we didn't break the world. Nuclear war, mass death, mass destruction, the ability to change and potentially end the world as we know it. It's the guilt Oppenheimer has been racking with the entire film. It's the factor that drives him the most, what he runs from, the idea that they broke society. In an apparent effort to protect and fix it, Oppenheimer must look down and see that the blood is on his own hands, that they ruined the world as we know it.
Reversing the flow of time. Doesn't us being here now mean it never happens?
Tenet, the first film released in this run, but the final film when discussing them as a trilogy. Tenet follows our protagonist, who learns that he's been selected to join Tenet, a secret espionage group. There, the protagonist learns of their tech that allows them to move backwards through time and must stop a coming war before it happens, or from ever happening in the first place. Explaining the plot of Tenet or trying to pitch the movie to someone feels like microdosing a headache. Much like Inception, and I'd argue most of the second half of Nolan's filmography is like this, the film is a bit heady, quite hard to understand, but undeniably enthralling. Tenet tells you from the jump though, don't try and understand it, just feel this one. There's far less logic and literal events baked into this. There's an idea of a threat, and I found the film to be much more directly allegorical and metaphorical than the rest of Nolan's filmography. And while Nolan can't help but do his rulebook stuff a bit, the movie mostly embraces this conceit, and I'd argue in many ways, it's Nolan letting go of the rulebook as much as he ever has, while still loving his gimmicks. While this whole video has been about Nolan moving backwards through time, Tenet is the first exploration of what he's done in full scale since Memento, and the most he's been willing to go all in on the concept. In many ways, this is a film about undoing a mistake, or getting a second chance. Like I mentioned with Oppenheimer and Odysseus, Nolan is showing a reality where it's too late. We've made mistakes we can't walk back. Yet, once again, we don't learn. We continue down these same paths, and what happens when we make a mistake that is truly as catastrophic as our worst nightmares, and we cannot walk it back in any way? Nolan is allowing us to try to a bit here, but at a great cost, and it seems like a warning more than anything. This is a Nolan film about surrendering control, not denying responsibility or choosing inaction, but a film about how our desire to control everything leads to this chaos and destruction. We are not simple and predictable creatures, yet many of the protagonists and ignorant men in Nolan's films presume so, despite the layers of nuance and complexity that can be found inside of them. The protagonists here having no name, very little backstory, and purposely very little emotion or desire on display really struck me, as it does feel like this is sort of a template movie for Nolan. Not in the sense that he's running through the motions or just following in his own footsteps, but more so that it's a template for Nolan's worldview, and how his future films will reflect that. Compare the protagonists to Oppenheimer and Odysseus. He wears guilt and is conflicted, yet the only real emotion or inner feeling we get from him is the hubris, the classic Nolan trait found in nearly every protagonist, the overwhelming conviction to follow out their task or skill to its completion, no matter the cost. I don't think Nolan is exempting or condemning the protagonist. If anything, he's an open reading. It feels like a film focused on the lead up to this person's personal inflection point, the moment where they either consider the consequences or dive in head first. Our characters are once again fighting the idea of an evil to come. Fragments of the future are coming back, and they spell the beginning of a catastrophic war. Much like the Odyssey and Oppenheimer, Tenet is a film plagued with visions of a future or ruin coming, one just on the other side of the horizon. Yet Nolan isn't pointing to any real moment, none that have happened yet in any way. Because Tenet is Nolan calling out how this cycle he's been exploring in Oppenheimer and the Odyssey is still occurring, and it will unfortunately likely continue and continue. They aren't sure if it's a war to come or one that has already passed us, but all they know is that destruction and death is coming. The villain is us, and it's interesting to me that Nolan will continue to explore similar threats in those two future films, but will more directly tie them to a figure from history, making it clear that their ignorance and blind compulsion to see their dream out will ruin them. He makes it clear that that level of power and consequence we are playing with post-Oppenheimer is too massive now. Brana will destroy the world and everything before it. The future is coming back to destroy the past. In some ways, this feels allegorical for our general rejection of the past. It's not surprising the script was written during Trump's first term about an ignorant leader destroying the world, and purposely rejecting and ignoring the past mistakes, then repeating them in the process, which once again brings him to the discussion of our ambition and hubris destroying us. I've mentioned the bomb and the Trojan horse as Pandora's box, as choices we made and can no longer take back. We created something bigger and more powerful than we can handle. In that way, Tenet feels like us trying to put the toothpaste back in the tube, our attempt to undo our biggest mistakes. It's a movie about going into the past and stopping something from ever happening, or changing the way it did. There's some interesting parallels to modern nuclear bomb-esque inventions and ideas. I immediately thought of AI on a rewatch. Even with this movie predating ChatGPT and AI hitting the mainstream, the fear with that stuff has always been there, and it very similarly feels like something we can't put back in the box once we've unleashed it. In that same vein, you can compare it to many different pieces of modern technology and advancements. The ecological cost that has come because of our desire to automate and improve on every aspect of life. It certainly feels like there is at least some apprehension to tech and reckless advancement in many of Nolan's films, and you can even tie that back to the fact that he's notoriously anti-smartphone and somewhat analog himself. But as I've mentioned and want to harp on as the main thing with this movie, it's a world mad with the sins of those past. A world mad at Oppenheimer for inventing the nuclear bomb instead of their desire to wield and revel in it. Oppenheimer mad at Prometheus for giving him fire that he so willingly used to pursue his own reckless ambitions. It's a future mad at its own history, unreflective of the role, and Nolan is directly calling us out through it. There's no villain, even Brana, because the unseen and unspoken villain of Tenet is us, our recklessness, and our lack of care. And it feels like Nolan's concern and critiques have only been validated with time. So what does it all mean? How do all these films tie together, and what is the overarching idea that Nolan is pursuing here? In many ways, this feels like an apocalypse trilogy. Not one set in the apocalypse, but one building towards it, or the fear of one. Each of these films is haunted by the idea of death, and more than death, destruction. Total societal death and collapse. We first see this in the Odyssey, where Odysseus' fear of destruction and death is much more metaphorical. As Odysseus reflects later in the film, the death he caused was internal. He killed the trust and bonds between humanity. His greatest invention, his own inhibition, ruined us. Even if it wasn't as destructive as the nuclear bomb has shown to be and can be, it's the action that opened Pandora's box. Odysseus handed us fire. He destroyed the bonds between us, and his men danced on its grave. Then in Oppenheimer, we see the invention of what is essentially humanity's doomsday device. While Odysseus invented something more metaphorically malicious than literally destructive, Oppenheimer's invention literally takes millions of lives, and has continued to be leveraged for its ability to do so again and again. You can even see the similarity in the inventions, stuffing as much of their conviction and heart and anger into this machine that will unleash destruction and rage on those it's been deployed on. They are very similar devices if you look at them from the right angle. Finally then, in Tenet, the device is not a literal one that has been built yet. Much like Nolan uses the text of the Odyssey to frame a metaphorical or ideological death in society, Nolan uses the literal world to discuss a potential disastrous future, but one that is rooted in our past mistakes, and our refusal to fully reckon with or learn from them. He isn't pointing to a literal device that could be our final undoing, as he's saying everything we've done and our continuation of it will be the cause. Even if the literal downfall comes from a new device or innovation, it will still be the result of our past sins and ignorance. Like I said, Tenet is a warning from the future of what the third part of this trilogy really could be. We are the architects of our own destruction, literally and metaphorically. We've destroyed our world, each other, and the fragile strings that kept us connected and together, and we will continue to do so until there's nothing left to destroy except everything and everyone. This guilt is tangible throughout all of these films. Each of these protagonists carry that burden. Interestingly, the Odyssey is much more reflective from top to bottom, even with most of the cast rejecting this. There's a much more somber tone permeating throughout all of the Odyssey. It's so fascinating because it's a mournful message in two ways, both of how we destroyed something good to start, and for all we know it may never return, but also how this original sin is reflective of our current destruction, and our inability to recognize the consequence of our ways. Our hubris leads us to believe that we could defy the gods, that we could break the natural order of things, to achieve our dreams or goals, that our desire for progress and innovation will justify the costs and potential consequences. Nolan is pointing out that these destructive natures, this desire for more, is inherent. It fascinates us and destroys us, internally, but more and more, literally too. Nolan is saying that our history is repeating itself, that the further we progressed and innovated, the more we find ourselves back in the past, repeating the mistakes. It's still not too late to reckon, to realize, to change, but it's on us.
So no one cares about the bomb that didn't go off. Only the one that did. It's the bomb that didn't go off. The danger no one knew was real. That's the bomb with the real power to change the world.